I'm gonna wait for the sprinkle. Hi everyone. It's exciting. We just keep getting like a bigger critical mass. This is really awesome. So you guys made the list. It's the first time I ever had to like shut off a meetup like a number of RSVPs. It's pretty cool actually. All right. First of all, I want to thank Figs for all the Figs people. We've got Arjun, Kelvin. Where's Javier? Where's Todd?
Here, Todd. They're grabbing stuff.
All right. They're still there. They're putting to work. Anyway, we just really want to thank Figs for hosting us. I'm kind of just trying to get a sense.
We're hiring front end and back end. Sorry.
What's that?
Sorry, we're hiring. So
yeah.
Todd or I, or Kelvin or Javier.
So that team right there, guys. Thank you so much, Figs, for kind of putting this on. This is like I think the first time they're hosting a meetup, and the first time we've done it in this part of town, and seems like a pretty good turnout. So pretty stoked.
Is it on Vue? Front end?
We've got some Vue. We're actually building up the front end. We're trying to decide the front end architecture right now. So
Cool.
yeah.
We do have back end that's on Vue right now.
We got to add some admin stuff right into Vue.
All right, so I think we're just going to jump into it. Matt has been kind enough to give our talk for this month. It is Solutions and Strategies for Testing Vue.js Applications. So I'm going to let him do the talking. We're going to probably do, what, like half an hour, and then like there'll be Q&A at the end. Anyway, Matt, thank you so much for doing this. And Matt's with Joymode. And where's John? There's John. Are there other Joymode people here too? Yeah, and yeah, thank you guys so much for putting on the talk. And
Before you start, are your slides going to be available?
I can we can distribute them, the slides.
Yes, in fact, we're going to record this for the first time ever. So I'm going to try to get like James, that reminds me, we got to get that website. But I'm going to get a YouTube channel of all these things. We have to keep having these great talks, and we have them isolated to the 30 or 40 of us, and I just think the Vue community in general will probably like them. So Matt's going to kick it off, and cool. Excellent. Thank you so much, Matt.
All right, so yeah, I'm going to talk about strategy for testing Nuxt Vue.js applications and how Joymode's growth team rapidly iterates with confidence and stability. So an overview of what I'm going to talk about. First, I'm going to give an intro to myself and about Joymode. Then I'm going to talk about just like the significance of automated testing. I'm going to talk about Joymode's customer strategy and like what we've decided that we want to move forward with. The tools that we explored, the tools that we ended up deciding to use, and then sort of like the next steps for us, and then questions and feedback after that. So who am I? I am a, slide should change. I'm a full stack engineer on the Joymode growth team. I've been writing code for 8 years professionally and for 16 years as a hobby. I previously worked at a company called Society6 as a platform engineer, so my focus there was on like microservice architectures. I've done mostly backend stuff across different like web languages like Ruby, PHP, Python, Node.js, what I would consider, and probably most of us would consider like legacy front-end technologies, like just basic HTML, vanilla JavaScript, and even jQuery now. I got my bachelor's degree in computer science at Cal State LA. I grew up in LA. And I consider myself a Vue.js beginner. I recently learned Vue.js at Joymode, and John, a lot of people have seen him present here, has been sort of like my mentor in learning this. So what is Joymode? Joymode is a subscription service where we allow members to reserve products. And so those products can range from like camping equipment to cooking equipment, video games and things like that. The idea is that we have a $29 a month subscription. And so you have a monthly subscription if you get any of these items delivered to your house. Our architecture is a Rails backend API with a Nuxt client application, and we also have iOS client as well. And important to point out is that we're a growing startup, and I'm sure a lot of us here work for startup companies. And so something that we all know with startups is that startups need to move really fast, but they also need to maintain stability. A startup needs to find product market fit, needs to find features that work for their customers, and needs to evolve really quickly. And you can do that really quickly, but if your code is breaking all the time, if your application is breaking all the time, then you're not going to be able to retain customers, and nobody's going to want to use your application. I have a quote here from Robert C. Martin, who's like one of like the kind of like the OG software guys, and I'm sure a lot of us have seen his talks, but he shares a lot of coding wisdom. The quote is, "Why do most developers fear to make continuous changes to their code? They're afraid they'll break it. Why are they afraid they'll break it? Because they don't have tests." And it's true. I've definitely worked in a lot of environments where I didn't want to touch somebody else's code because I didn't understand what it was doing, and because of that, maybe I end up building a feature completely around that separate code, and so that just takes a lot more time. And then when I do have to edit some of that code, then because I don't understand it completely, I break things, and we don't find out about that until customer service reaches out and tells us that the customer has an issue. And what's that?
Do it lagging?
A little bit, yeah, or maybe I'm not close enough. So I think we all know that testing code is important, but testing is like flossing in a way. It's like you got to do it. Feels like a chore. You don't really get like immediate value from it, but you know that like long term it's going to pay off. So testing code is important because it allows for rapid refactoring. You can clean up your code, you can change things really fast and be confident that you didn't destroy anything. Because if your test pass and you know that the behavior that you're expecting to get from your code is still functioning. Testing improves the design of your software, and this is particularly true of unit testing. If you guys have experience writing unit tests, you find that if you have a function that has a lot of conditions inside of it, function is maybe 100 lines long, and you're trying to write a test that tests the behavior of that function, then it's going to be a headache. You're going to have to try a bunch of like weird kind of like mocking things to try to get it to work. But if you have a really simple function that's a few lines long, very clear input and output, then writing unit tests is really easy. So by writing tests, you're sort of forced to move into that direction of simpler and cleaner code. And of course, testing code is important because it ensures that the feature that you create stands the test of time. Because when you think about it, if you write a feature for an application, for a website or whatever product you're working on, and you're working on a team, just like I mentioned before, it's possible for that teammate to not understand what your code is intended to do, to modify it to get their feature to work, and then all of a sudden your feature grows. So as kind of an aspect of like being like a professional coder, or like writing code that is high quality and that won't break, testing is important because it ensures that your code will stand the test of time and it's not fragile. So Joymode's strategy for writing tests, this is what we decided to move forward with. Write end-to-end tests first for critical paths, then write unit tests as the system matures. So just to kind of like describe this a little bit and describe what end-to-end tests are. End-to-end testing is a technique used to test whether the flow of an application from start to finish is behaving as expected. So a lot of us might be familiar with like Selenium and like Selenium testing. And those are tests where you write a script that will actually like click a button. And so it might go and click your sign up button, and then a modal pops up, and then it enters text in the username and password fields, and then it submits that form. So when you write that type of test, you're not just testing the front-end JavaScript, you're testing the JavaScript, also the API call that your sign-in submission makes. You're testing the database that your backend is probably calling, making sure that that's functioning as expected, and that the response is parsed correctly and the feedback comes to the user as expected. That's what is meant by an end-to-end test, and that it tests the entire flow of functionality as opposed to one part of it. Unit tests are, you might consider it the opposite in a way, where you're not testing an entire system. you're testing a single unit. So this might be like a simple function. The idea is to validate that all of these like units of code that you're building up function as expected. And it's really unit tests that enforce what I mentioned earlier, that cleaner design. So the reasons why we chose to leverage the strategy and some of my own personal learnings. When I was working at Society6, working on back-end microservices, we're building various APIs to handle different aspects of the business. And just like the situation that most of us usually in, we have to sort of rebuild the airplane while it's flying. And so because of that, as we're developing these microservices, we didn't know what they were going to turn out to be when we initially started writing code. We created a new code base. We knew that generally the behavior was maybe to render images or to handle like our product catalog, but we didn't know the architecture that we were going to settle on. And so what we were doing was we were writing code, but we were writing a lot of unit tests, of course, to make sure that the code functioned as expected. Then we'd find that the fundamental architecture of like what we wanted to build was changing. And so we end up like wiping away these unit tests or like tediously going back and updating them to change them to the behavior that we actually wanted. And what we found was that in order to make sure that the function that we're writing at the moment worked, we could more simply write an end-to-end test to verify the feature. And then as the system matured, then we could identify, okay, this is a core component. So let's write unit tests to make sure that this core component is going to work as expected. The same thing was recognized at Joymode when we had our monolith application. And a little bit of background, we just migrated from a monolithic Rails application. We split the application, we separated the front end, and created a Nuxt Vue application to handle the front end client side aspect of the application. So when we were a monolith, we ended up taking the same approach just because the nature of the company, we had to iterate really quickly. So same thing, let's write end-to-end tests to make sure that this new feature works. Let's see over the next few weeks whether or not we're going to keep the feature. A lot of cases we don't.
What's Nuxt?
Nuxt is a framework that allows you to create basically single-page applications with Vue. Nuxt provides like a lot of tools to make it easier to create like a full-page application. And it has like a lot of benefits like pre-rendering built into it.
So you don't need Nuxt for it to use Vue, but a lot of people in the room do because it just helps organize a little better when trying to build something.
Yeah, and the reason, one of the reasons why John suggested that we use Nuxt for our application was because performance is really important for us. We need to make sure that users come into the application and they're able to, get the experience, the optimal experience that they can get. Also to manage SEO, because we want the Google bot to be able to index pages effectively and not have to worry about whether or not they were going to render all the JavaScript and then let the content load on the page and then index that content. And so, yeah, so the same pattern was implemented with our Rails application. And after having just rebuilt the entire site, this same thing occurred with our Nuxt application, iterating really quickly. And we just need to make sure that like our sign up works, the ability for somebody to reserve products would work, the ability for somebody to subscribe as a member would work, and a few other flows, so that we didn't continuously break them. So for the strategy overall, end-to-end tests first, and then unit tests as the system matures. Here are some pros of that. Again, we ensure that the stability of like our most important features is taken care of. It buys us time to identify really the core of the application and to shift the architecture. Writing end-to-end tests is pretty easy. It's quick to do because you don't have to refactor your code. Like writing your unit test, you don't have to like refactor your function to make it easier to test. End-to-end tests are forgiving on code that is not structured, super well. Some of the cons are end-to-end tests. They can be flaky sometimes. So you have an end-to-end test and it loads an entire page and it clicks your sign up button and then that modal loads. If you have like a backend API that is slow for some reason, maybe the machine that you're running the tests from has like connectivity issues, then your test can fail, and then you're looking at your test and your application, you're like, well, what broke? And then you run the test again, and then they pass. So like that can be probably one of the most frustrating things about end-to-end tests, but not necessarily a deal breaker. It's hard to debug issues because when your test fails, you've tested the entire system. So when your test fails, you need to look at every aspect of the system and kind of like hone in on where the issue is. With a unit test, when a test fails, you know exactly what function and usually even what line failed and caused the issue. So it's easier to go and fix that quickly. And again, end-to-end tests don't enforce quality code. So applying this approach to a Nuxt application. So we first just kind of Googled how to test Vue applications. And then a few things came up. I think this is actually in Nuxt documentation. It's a tool called AVA. Basically, it's a headless like testing tool, like a headless browser almost. You can write end-to-end tests using that tool. However, it doesn't support viewing in browsers. So when that situation happens and a test breaks, if you can't see why the test broke, then it becomes like super tedious to try to hunt that down because you don't know if like the page even loaded or maybe you're targeting the wrong like button or something like that. Nightwatch was another one, and this one they provide like pretty decent tools for end-to-end testing. But the challenge that I've always had and that we had at Joymode previously, and I've like seen a bunch in the past, is that when you set up end-to-end tests, you basically need software that will open the browser and click the buttons for you and like listen to your commands. And that tool, like the ubiquitous one, is called Selenium. And so you need Selenium set up, and then you need a driver for Selenium, which is usually like a Chrome driver or like Gecko driver. And that's the tool that will open in like either Chrome or Firefox, and then work with Selenium in order to like perform actions on the browser. So Nightwatch looked good, but like the configuration of Selenium was just like something we didn't really want to deal with if we didn't have to. Same thing with WebDriver IO. We use that extensively at Society 6 for testing our interface. And again, just like the tediousness of like configuring these things and setting them up was always tough.
Sorry, do you guys use snapshots at all when you do testing?
Not yet. Yeah. But I believe Jest is the tool that we're going to use to, and that actually we are using for unit testing. Yeah. The tool that looked most appealing to us was Cypress. Has anybody had experience with Cypress?
We've been looking at those
Yeah. Cool.
as a potential.
Cool. The thing that really stood out immediately with Cypress was that we didn't have to deal with Selenium, and we didn't have to deal with like a Chrome driver or anything like that, and like do a bunch of like installation of like libraries that will allow us to unit test. They really did a good job of solving that problem. And this is just like a diagram from their website, and it might be hard to see a little bit, but what they did was something that you might consider similar to what Stripe did for payment processing. They said like, this is a really hard and tedious thing to set up. So let's just make like an easy interface for developers and think about the developer's experience, and then make it simple to set up. And so, like what I was mentioning before, you have Selenium, and then you have a variety of other tools that you need to set up to get your end-to-end tests running. Cypress just consolidates all of that to install Cypress, and then you're good to start writing some tests.
Sorry, is Cypress doing what all those do, or is Cypress organizing the use of each of those?
Yeah, like, is it a starter kit or is it like a framework?
It's like an application. So it's actually an Electron application, and it does all of these things for you. They say that you no longer they say that they're without Selenium. So I'm not sure like how they would, what solution they use. I'm guessing like since Electron is kind of like the Chrome browser anyway,
Yeah.
they're probably just using that.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
it'll power Chrome.
Uh,
But that does make the assumption that you only want to test it.
mhm. Yeah,
Which
that's
is
right.
where you end up back in Selenium. That becomes important.
Yeah, definitely. That's a really great point.
They're really close to getting other browsers, but they tap into the actual backend API of the browser rather than like simulating or running and automating a browser. They're actually tapping into APIs. So they have to write hooks to each individual browser, which is why they haven't gotten the whole suite of them.
That's why Selenium is such a pain.
Yes.
Yeah. That's exciting that they're writing hooks to other browsers.
Firefox is almost done, and then they said like Safari will probably come at some point soon too.
Cool.
Great.
That's awesome.
Please.
Did you guys look at any of the automation services like Maple?
We haven't yet. Yeah.
Yeah.
What is Maple?
for John, maybe?
Maple's like a service where you can basically just run through like kind of like you're building like a macro. You can run through it, click
Got
on
it.
stuff, and it'll do some basic code generation
Got
for
it.
you that you can tweak, and then it'll run the code and supposedly
That's cool.
it'll use AI to optimize the test over time or adapt the testing to any UI changes.
That's cool.
Yeah.
There's Sauce Labs.
Right. Yeah. For running your tests like on
It gets slow.
an environment.
Have more work tests. Like our work is to have at least 1,000 test scenarios, and it chugs. Like if you're because it's doing all of that stuff remotely. So just have to keep in mind if you're using those services.
Yeah, that's a good point. Our application is in terms of features and relative in terms of traffic as well. Like we're not slamming our application. It's not at huge scale yet. So that is something that would change over time. And I'm curious how Cypress would scale. One of our engineers, Asif, is setting up our continuous deployment pipeline. And so that's another thing that we want to see, like how these tools behave in that pipeline. But I'll kind of touch on that.
Before you just again, so it was clear in my head, is Cypress, let's say, replacing both Chai and Express, or is it within there, like letting you select, like, pick Chai or Express? It replaces everything.
Yeah.
Got it, okay.
Because that's where it says before Cypress and with Cypress.
Exactly. Yeah. And go back one. So this is just some Vue code within one of our signup forms. I just wanted to show this because currently we hook into certain like CSS classes. I'm definitely curious like other people's solutions on like how to do this in a clean way. But a lot of times when you set up end-to-end tests, you need to you need to target elements in some way. So we use CSS classes that are prefixed with JS dash, and this is just like our simple convention to know that this is not a style. This is something that JavaScript is going to hook into.
One thing that we did in my last job to avoid having class, we just used data attributes, like data dash test ID or something like that.
Cool.
Well, specifically on their site, they recommend that you use data-cy
Oh, cool.
equals whatever.
Perfect.
It's the same thing as like an ID, but it's a specific ID
Yeah.
for Cypress.
Yeah. And
So I went, like, I was originally using, IDs and classes,
yeah.
and then I found that later, and I was just like, oh my God, this makes your life so much simpler. This data-cy equals whatever name you want, because you're only going to target one button
Yeah.
or something, you know what I mean? So you
That's
just
awesome.
put that everywhere.
That's super cool.
It also forces you to get good at naming parts of your application.
Yeah.
Well, they also
Yeah,
say like,
definitely.
because you might change class names or you might change ID names or whatever.
Yeah.
They're like, just keep it a separate thing.
Uh-huh.
And so yes, it's a data attribute, but it's very specific. Data-cy meaning Cypress.
Yeah.
And then that's your hook to everything that you need.
That's perfect. That's cool.
Yes.
Yeah.
Webpack.
There's a post node transformed hook, which post transform node hook is something used.
So John will present next week after we do that.
We have actually started in a few places, not all of our tests, but in a few places we're using data-QA, but I think data-CY is the harder way to actually write the hook. But it's not everywhere yet. We're still transitioning a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Which templating language is this? Just so people.
This is Pug.
Bug. Just
Right? Pug?
anybody
Yeah,
else?
Pug. We're also moving away from writing stuff in Pug and switching back to normal HTML to do it better.
So we needed a way to hook into or to target elements. So we use those CSS classes, and then this is a simple test in Cypress. It looks very similar to basically every other or many other testing tools that we use, where we want to test the sign up functionality. It should allow a user to sign up. What we're doing here is we're just defining some variables to like populate the sign up form, and then we call. Well, first we go to the home page, and then we call cy.signup. This is basically a custom command that you can create when you want to like execute a series of steps a bunch of times. And we might have like a bunch of statements where we test the same flow. So you can just kind of consolidate that into a command, so you don't have to type it out a bunch of times. So we call cy.signup, and we pass in our data. And then it should allow a user to view the home feed. After they sign up, they get to the home feed. Because of that scenario where, like I mentioned, tests can be flaky sometimes, like depending on like page loads and things like that. In some cases, we've had to like explicitly like wait some amount of time, which like always sucks because then the performance of your tests is essentially like capped at a at whatever you set these weights to be. So that's something that we're also trying to figure out. So we're curious if you guys.
Could you not use like a simple weight?
That's a good question. I'm not sure how that works with like Cypress's tooling.
So it's letting you could have presence of offers that would just restrict offers.
Yeah.
I don't know if Cypress is that.
Cypress does have methods that would do that, but for some reason, maybe we didn't understand like the proper way to use those methods, but in some cases, like the wait wouldn't occur.
No, there's a specific thing that you wait until you get the, basically like the return from that. I can't quote it the same way that I quoted the data.CY, but I use it everywhere because it's like you can also test in cases where you've got like 3 calls going out at the same time, and it waits for all 3 to come back. And so it's also in the documentation. I can look it up and send it to you.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Also, depending on exactly what you're doing, you could just mount the response, and that way.
Yeah.
I mean, depending on.
Yeah.
If this is a Vue app, then you could mount the response.
Yeah.
You could just return it, and you don't have to wait.
In this use case, I think it's, so the page is transitioning to a new page.
Yeah.
And then the components on that page are rendering.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason it happens here that if we don't like force a wait, that what we're trying to verify, or at least that the URL, like the URL hasn't changed for some reason. But another place for us to like optimize and improve.
Right, but I mean, one of the big challenges of sorry, some of the things you didn't mention but we faced are these can get slow. I mean,
definitely.
like depending on the complexity of your app, you could end up with end-to-end tests that take an hour or 2 to run, and that has limits.
Yeah, definitely.
Also have issues of maintaining the fixtures to set the thing up, then how that works with data updates and other things. I'm not arguing with end-to-end tests being necessary, but there is definitely a challenge to.
Absolutely, yes. I would say that end-to-end tests, like in a scaled application, they end up being the thing that sucks about trying to manage a continuous deployment pipeline. And we actually did experience it with our previous Rails application, because the reason why they're slow is that you need the pages to load, and then the tool to recognize that the page is loaded and everything's there, and then take that next step. And that's not going to be as fast as like a unit test where you're just testing a function, because those, execute
Did you ever try to do request specs?
Yes, yeah. And so request specs are kind of similar to end-to-end tests. So I guess the conceptual or the difference that we might recognize is that when we refer to end-to-end tests, a lot of times we talk about like from a user interface. So like a request spec is like from the API interface. So it's like kind of a little bit of a different interface. But yeah, very, very similar. And I think it's actually the user interface, like the browser loading, that ends up taking a lot of the time for these tests. Scaling horizontally is a solution, but yeah, like that still is a challenge for sure.
I would add that like it's much better than a manual QA tester. So, I think that's, you have to always think about that.
Yeah.
But a manual QA tester will find things that aren't in these tests.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and then
I mean, if you're willing to wait around for 10 hours,
I know.
someone says, hey, you
And
can
also,
deploy it,
I know.
for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so I found it. So it's like, it's a two-step process. So first you create your alias for a route. So you go cy.route, and then whatever your Ajax call route is, and then .as, and then you name it. Usually you just name it the same thing. So you create that route, and then later on in your script, you can use cy.wait, and it uses at the route name, and then it just literally waits for the exact amount of time until that route comes back, and then it continues. So you're not randomly going like 2 seconds or something.
Yeah. Cool. That's awesome. Thank you. But yeah, again, good points to bring up about end-to-end tests. At scale, they end up being a bottleneck. And so you need to find new solutions to deal with them. At the scale of our application now, we don't have to worry about that.
We're going to say something?
We can talk later.
Oh.
Shoot, that's fine. I mean, you should continue on.
Oh, go for it. Go for it.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, we run our tests in, like, what we do is we have different scenario files, essentially. And then we're able to basically split them up and run them in parallel. So basically, even if one of the instances finishes a test scenario first, it'll just pick up another one, and then it'll just go on until that queue of tests is finished up. So
that's cool.
What used to take an hour and a half, now we finish in 15, 20 minutes. So it makes a big difference.
That's impressive. Another type of solution, what we did at Society 6 was we broke our tests up into groups. Like these are like sort of like critical tests, and these test like various features that are like not critical. And we would run the full test suite like once or twice a day, in the morning and at night. And we would run a smaller test suite on deployment. So that allowed us to get things out confidently, but also catch like issues that weren't critical, but that we should fix. So it's a different strategy.
I mean, Matt kind of got the, okay, break it up and really your CI end-to-ends should be only the most critical. Like, I call them money makers. The things that will cost you money, they go out, and then everything else can just be run on like a reporting basis.
I want to go to something that you try to address because it still bothers me because it's very interesting. But my philosophy is that if you have a modular architecture, intuitively you want to first do unit testing, especially if they're done by different teams, and you integrated them. Even when it's not ready, we say assume that that's what they're going to give to you, and what you're supposed to return back to them, and run it so that each unit in a modular fashion will be tested as close at the time that it was written by the team that was written, so that you don't end up at the end to end of several teams coming and you're trying to debug the whole thing. That seems to me not optimal at all.
Absolutely. Right. And that's a good point in that it depends on the structure of the team. And again, I think on the delivery schedule of what you need to produce. With like John and I on like our growth team, we're producing things, we're releasing several times a day and producing significant features within a week. And we do a lot of A/B testing, so we measure whether or not those features are successful or not, and then we get rid of those features. So To write unit tests, not to say that like it necessarily takes more. It does take more time, but personally, I don't use that as like leverage to not write them. I think the bigger thing is that we want to figure out an architecture that's going to work best for us in the long run, and so we don't want to create this sort of like cast around an architecture that is not the one that we're going to end up
Do you
using.
spend any time ahead of time thinking and planning that architecture before you start coding?
That would be, I think the amount of time that you have to plan improves the architecture of your code up to some like diminishing return, right? I think for the type of work that we're doing, because we're kind of like rapid fire, we don't put in enough time to like do like long-term, testing. But at the same time, it's like we don't know whether or not the feature that we're building should be abstracted to the degree that we're going to be able to leverage it for many different use cases, because it might not be worth changing our architecture to accommodate that feature, because it might go away within a week.
It's possible, but you have a microservice background, right? The whole philosophy is that you go down so much that each microservice does one thing only.
Yeah.
Right? So it shouldn't be too difficult to test it, have it, and if you have to drop it, you drop it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
do you think that that's also a philosophy?
I think that's definitely also a philosophy. I think that's a great like path to go down if you're able to go down it. I think an alternative path is like in our use case where we have an application that's capable of changing its architecture dramatically. We don't necessarily know what it's going to be like in a few months, because in fact, this architecture we created like a couple months ago. So it's still very, very new. So for our use cases, we found that like, let's make sure that the core features that we need to function behave as they need to, and then that allows us to like change things as dramatically as we need to. Yeah, different approaches. Yeah.
I like how he really put you in the hot seat and you responded well.
I feel like the real answer to that is the guy who's writing the paycheck says, how long is this going to take you? It'll take a month if I do unit tests.
Yeah.
What if you don't do unit tests? 3 weeks. Don't do unit tests. That's how that discussion goes.
Yeah, and that's definitely an aspect of it for sure. Yeah.
Don't do any testing, it takes 2 weeks, and that's for negotiation. You have 3 weeks in the middle.
Yeah. We'll do it later. End testing.
Yeah, so to touch back up on this, the commands that we looked at earlier, the repeated code that we execute a bunch of times over, this is what it is. It's just, it targets those hooks, those classes that we set up on our signup module. Then it populates the data that we pass into the function, and then it hits submit. Oh, skipped a bunch. And then we use this command to run the. So when you open Cypress, there are 2 methods that you can run Cypress tests, or 2 ways you can do it. So you can do it through their Electron UI. And what this does is it like basically opens up a Chrome browser and it gives you the list of tests that you're running. And then it will execute them for you. So you can visually observe how the tests are performing. If there's an issue, I actually don't have a good screenshot of this, but as the test is executing, you can actually see all of the network requests that are executing and sort of like the behavior that is occurring within the browser in order to more easily identify like when something doesn't work, what is the thing that didn't work. Did you get a 400 response from your API? That'll be highlighted. Alternatively, you can run from the command line, and this is what we would use for our CI pipeline. And just like any other testing suite, gives you green check marks.
Do both of these methods work like behind a firewall where you can't reach the internet?
So
like on-premise?
That's a good question. I'm sure it depends on the application, because if your application has third-party dependencies and it needs to connect to those, and I don't know that there may be. I don't know that there is a way to like mock those dependencies in these end-to-end tests.
Okay, but you're not going on like the Cypress website doing your test.
Oh no, yeah, you're doing this on your laptop. Yeah.
You can reach the site from testing.
Right. Exactly.
And there's also, I haven't used this a lot, but there's also very good stubbing mechanisms so that you can just set up fake data for whatever API calls or.
Well, more like I'm writing like a journal.
Right. If you can navigate there, the test can get there.
Yeah, exactly.
Have you ever tested it on any queries?
Like directly on like a database query?
Yeah, no, like if you're using Elasticsearch in your site.
So the end-to-end test, if you have a user interface, like a search bar, for example, and you, for instance, here we're testing our sign-up interface. If you're testing your search, you can insert a query and then hit the submit button using like the Cypress tools, and then it's gonna make that full request to your Elasticsearch database and then return the results. And then you'll see your search results page. So if that's the test that you want to run to verify that your Elasticsearch is running, like that'll do it. That'll work.
We do our own entire testing, so Docker. So we spin up the database and Elasticsearch or whatever else, and the web server, and then a separate Docker image that has Cypress in it.
Cool.
And then they all just talk to each other. And yeah, it probably does talk to the internet for some stuff, but for the most part, it's really
cool. So again, you can run on the command line. Yeah, and so, I mean, our test suite with Cypress is still relatively small. Again, our application is pretty new. And so we make sure that our money-making paths work as expected while we figure out how to mature this application. But so far, it's worked for us in that we're able to get a really a good end-to-end testing solution set up without having to spend all that time figuring out the Selenium configuration that we ran into in the past. For unit testing components, this is sort of like a de facto tool that is used in Vue applications. The idea with Vue test utils is that you can take a component, like here this module is a component that John built actually, and you can essentially put it in, like isolate it, and just as like a regular unit test, give it input, give it some props, and then look at the state of the component after you do that and verify that it's in the correct state. So we have a test which verifies this module, and basically what it does is it uses Vue.js test utils. But what that tool does is it creates the environment that you can then load your component in. And essentially, you mount your component into that environment, and then you can assert the state of that component after giving it some prompts or some input or triggering some kind of action on that component, like clicking a button. And so here we just make sure that on that module, this is actually a module that we use to create a link for each user and then send like a referral link so somebody can, in this case, claim a free month. So we just verify that that link is formatted correctly. So this is just like sort of our starter Vue.js test utils unit test. It's not an incredibly complex component, but we aim to like start building more of these tests for the components that we found are core. And yeah, just running it from the command line, again, gives you nice check marks. This is actually my favorite part of testing anything, is getting the green check marks.
How does it deal with UX state?
That's a good question. We haven't delved into that yet. Do you have comments on that?
Yeah, there's, I think Vue test utils allows you to kind of create a
so it treats it like a prop for the tester.
Yeah, essentially, you're just, like it's, the whole idea is like input and output, right?
Right.
Here's the props that I would apply, or here's a store populated with stuff.
So it's not a real UX instantiation, it's just let's pretend like UX had this data.
Yeah, and so the way that, I also like import, I've got just like JSON files that look like what our API responses look like, and I just import those and supply that. And I believe in that component, everything comes in as props. Whereas like a parent component would probably deal with the store, the UX store, and pass that down to children as props. But so it makes it a little bit easier, like everything is a prop.
Vue test utils is thing that comes with a test runner itself, or like everything combined?
Yeah, that's a good question.
No, we're using Jest. That's right. We can use Jest, Montanez, but I think I decided to go with Jest because we are also planning on doing snapshot tests with Jest in the future, so let's just consolidate on Jest.
I think Jest gives really good stack traces on failure too.
Cool.
It's like I've had to go back to Karma lately, and it's frustrating when a test fails and it just says it fails.
Yeah.
You know, it's like you get the full stack.
If you use the VuejsLA, you basically already contain the test utilities. I think this is Jest already. And getting
Cypress also is an option to install.
and getting the Vue test utils set up properly is just a lot easier in Jest because of that.
Cool. For this application, we're not using the Vue CLI since we're on Nuxt, but I did just spin up a Vue CLI project just so I could see how the test directory structure was done in Vue CLI, so I just copy it to this. It's like, yeah, just follow that convention. It wasn't kind of like reinvent anything.
So looking forward, so we're going to continue building out end-to-end tests for critical paths if they come up as they arise. Yeah.
Sorry, on the topic of Jest, testing components, how did you go about making it work within Nuxt? I remember because Webpack config isn't like available in Nuxt, and to render your components, your test util kind of needs to understand how to run and go through Webpack config given certain scenarios.
I'm sure it's a huge, well, so the unit tests are going to be on like normal components, not like page level components. And normal components have nothing unique for them that like isn't in normal Vue. So like page components in Nuxt have async data and fetch and some other like special things specific to Nuxt. Whereas for unit tests, we just want like, I want this small component, just test that. Here are props. There's no, again, I'm not even trying to like pass in state, I'm just trying to pass in props and say, is everything here work? So it's like, there's nothing really Nuxty about it, it's just.
Yeah. So you don't have to bootstrap the environment altogether, it's just a component that you're testing.
If you're using single page app mode in Nuxt, then the page really is just a component, right? It doesn't, you're not relying on those async data calls.
Yeah.
You're not loading from the server. You're not preloading data from the server.
I mean, there is some using SPA mode on Nuxt. The page components still have access to like the async data and the fetch stuff. Those fire different, like the lifecycle is a little different. So like if you're arrive at a page or routing between pages, like let's say I want to go from the index page to the blog page, and you said like async data, let's get all the blog posts in your async data, it will perform that API call at the this thing. Even though it's front-end routing, you can see a little loading bar at the top. That's just waiting for the API call to actually happen. So the page components still use those async data fetch hooks, even if you're not using universal.
Right. Okay. But if you have pages that specifically aren't using those, then page is effectively just a big.
Yeah, essentially. Yeah, I mean, like there's a few special things in page components and Nuxt, so like async data fetch to populate stuff before create.
Right.
And then like the layout and the meta stuff, the head meta stuff. There might be some other things. Those are like the main Nuxt page component specific.
I asked John not to outshine me, but I'm just kidding. So yeah, so just to wrap up, so yeah, our end-to-end tests are working for us so far. If there are other critical paths we missed, we're gonna make sure we have end-to-end tests for those, and then we're gonna identify our core components and then build out our unit test suite and make sure that our mature application always functions as we need to. And Asif has been doing a really good job at getting our CI/CD pipeline set up. And hopefully he'll give a presentation soon on how he does that. Yeah, and so, yeah, any more questions?
So one question I had was just around like, is there a way to be able to like, for every scenario that you have, like since with end-to-end tests, like they're building on what's another test that might have run, like is there a way to like have like a hook or something where you can basically write your own stuff to reset the state of your internals?
So these tests actually, I believe it's per file will reset the state. I think it will actually open up the browser again.
I meant more in the back end, like in your database and like, you know, if you need to clean up stuff in there.
Right, and that's one of the challenges, and that's what this gentleman mentioned about having fixtures set up and having basically, your data like set up and cleaned out. Like we actually aren't doing that yet because for us, the things we're testing, we're able to add more data to our staging database. Like there's no consequence for that right now. But yeah, that is something that gets a little bit more complex. And I'm not sure if Cypress will necessarily do that for you, or if you need to run another command in your like CI pipeline that will set up your database for you and then allow the end-to-end test to run.
What I've kind of done is like you basically just go to the notebook tab and copy the response from the REST request and just throw it
Mock
in
it.
your test.
I see. Yeah, like yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
To defend your view on end-to-end testing, and maybe also, I'm wondering, because I'm in the position that professionally, unfortunately, I am not working with Vue yet. I found myself in a position to do React on my day job right now. So I'm just wondering if, because it's a new team, new project, and tests. Yeah, we know we need to do them, but nobody really wants to do them.
Yeah, that's always.
So I'm wondering, actually, if you can use Cypress to write your tests with the existing React code base, and then slowly but surely move everything over to Vue, because it seems like with the data CUI attribute, I have access to the components themselves, so I can swap those out.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. That's a really good strategy too, because you can write those tests to make sure that the important parts of your code work as end-to-end tests, and completely rewrite how the code underlying
Like Cypress has nothing to do with Vue, right?
Right. With this type of test, it's only looking at the interface and only looking at that rendered HTML and trying to identify your selectors based on a data attribute or a CSS class or ID or whatever. So how that HTML gets generated, it has no concern about that. Yeah.
From the unit test side, Jest, yes. Yeah. So you're already there on that. Jest is a React tool. So yeah.
On that note, not related to testing, but what's the motivation to move from React to Vue?
Developer satisfaction.
In what sense?
There's so my experience with Vue is not extensive, but there's just like little things in React with JSX. You could, I mean, it's fine. You can get used to it. It's not a big deal. It's not like writing PHP or anything in this kind of thing.
That's my strongest language.
It was good in 2000. So it's not a deal breaker. Also, since I'm in a position that I will be, again, managing most likely a lot of junior developers, I did hear that Vue is easier to bring up than React. And you have also a little bit from, then it's better of a separation of, it's not a model view controller, obviously, but, you have HTML, you have tooling with HTML, so it's a little nicer separation. You could even, for whatever reason, I mean, it's LA, there's still like great agencies, right, that really have dedicated pixel pushers and HTML and CSS designers, right? And you can, it seems like you could utilize this type of talent pool a lot better potentially in Vue.
That's mainly to build your UI, basically.
Correct. Yes.
But question on the, I mean, I haven't used that much too. I mean, also look on React as the project gets more comprehensive and the library. You still find it.
So it'll scale in the same way that a React application would scale, but I think the benefits that you just mentioned are they ring true, and I say that from personal experience that the way that you write Vue components looks very similar to the way that you write normal HTML, that you're used to writing JavaScript, and that you're used to writing CSS. So you're not responsible for understanding how the translation will occur for those like aspects of your code, and so it's really just kind of like easy to like get the hang of quickly, but it'll scale in the same way that you want to design React components that are like in a good architecture and that are reusable and things like that.
Yeah, and I'm not totally set on the idea. In fact, I would like to hear a lot of. I would like to hear opinions and experiences from people who have worked with both to some degree, right? And because it is, but at the end of the day, it's a cost-benefit analysis, right? And how you can then talk to the decision makers.
It's definitely been a challenge for us to do. I mean, we've been looking for React for the last 12 months. But has anyone started reacting with Vue?
The last time somebody started with Vue.
Sorry?
You erased him.
Yeah, I've learned React before I learned Vue. I also did Angular JS prior to that, and then Backbone prior to that. So, the learning curve for Vue is so much easier than React.
Correct.
And especially, I find, and you commented on this last one too, like, you can find anyone who does React, and within 2 weeks they'll be writing Vue no problem, because a lot of the ideas are the same. The component-based architecture, the Redux lifecycle, like all of this is pretty familiar territory for a React person. And then just for anyone who isn't a React person coming from traditional web development, a lot of it feels familiar.
That makes sense. I would just, it seems so obvious to me, like JSX is like a whole other thing.
It's not really that.
No, but it is to someone who has not come out of React. If you say to someone, hey, to know Vue, you just need to know HTML and CSS and JavaScript. You don't need to know anything about JSX. That, to me, is the big advantage to Vue. Especially if someone, like, I train a lot of people, it's like way easier to not have to deal with JSX.
I'll agree with that. I spent probably over a year just kind of going back and forth, looking at both Angular and React, going like, which one do I want to do? Which one do I like? All I was doing was jQuery, and I was like, I don't know, I can't decide, whatever. And then finally, 2 years ago, when Vue popped onto the radar, and I looked at it for like 10 minutes, and like, let me just do one little thing, and I'm like, oh my god, this is so intuitive. And I'm like, thank God I don't have to decide.
Yeah, my only question is for someone who's, when your project gets really complex and comprehensive, a lot of statement, a lot of, users and a lot of data, without jQuery, nothing in your application.
I would say Nuxt is way better at that stuff, just because it forces some conventions on you that you can do in Vue, but you just wouldn't even know about them.
That's how I feel about React.
Well, if you want the same experience in React, and Next.
Yeah.
All right.
But, I mean, I think in regards to managing state and data, I think, in my opinion, even Vue and the Vuex store or React and Redux and any other flavors of the store, they all fell short in a way that it's not that simple once it gets complicated and it becomes a data science project. Right. And I think that's an issue that's kind of like that's waiting to be solved. And maybe something like Apollo's out there that kind of really simplifies that. Mm-hmm. But I think that's a separate debate in regards to like what the core competencies are.
I was just like, I like React too, so.
I hear you. So we have like the context API and hooks and everything.
The thing that I would be curious if you have big projects. My experience is like, for instance, Angular, like upgrading to newer versions is like a huge pain, whereas so many times in React, I've just like updated my package JSON to the next version and like nothing changes, and it's just suddenly faster and better. What's the experience?
My experience for you guys is with Vue has been like very nothing ever breaks.
Okay.
It's amazing. Because I know what you're talking about in Angular. It's like the worst.
But coming from React, like the biggest thing for me was React, and the biggest relief I felt was actually just reactive data. Like I remember trying to build a login or just a simple registration form when I was just like getting started with React, and I just couldn't believe how much effort that took.
Yeah, you show setup and lifecycle to understand it. It's a little.
I mean, it's not even just the understanding of it. Like for a very simple form is difficult, and then if you start to want to do more with that form, like the amount of code and logic that you would have to build, just starts to exponentially grow in regards to this form.
I disagree with that.
Yeah.
I disagree. Because well, I don't want to go into that. Stick to that.
I'm getting tired of it. So.
Now, I've got some testing questions.
Yeah.
The kind of work we do, where it's way more sort of on the design side rather than like functionality and things like that.
Yeah.
We really need a way to test, I guess, like CSS, I would say. Like, did this change break a layout?
Yeah.
Could you do that in any way with Cypress, or is that?
Well, I mean, Cypress, there is some snapshot functionality, but I think Jest would probably be the better tool. Yeah. I think it would probably be simpler to manage.
Yeah.
And that would do those snapshots, and that's probably the way to go if you want to make sure that you don't push a CSS change that like totally messes up.
Percy. Yeah. Okay. Percy.io.
Percy.io. Yeah. I thought his name was Percy.
Percy.io is just when you run end-to-end test run, it'll take screenshots for you. Tell the test to take screenshots, and then it'll just do a pixel test.
Yeah, okay.
So you get some false positives, but like if you're looking for like
we've used snapshot backstop.
Okay.
Yeah, and similar things. But I kind of wanted something that didn't rely on like
visual
breaking it, like regression of it.
Yeah.
Something that would maybe a little ahead of it.
Got it. Cool. All right. Last one more question.
Yeah. Do we really need to code?
Like Drew mentioned, if your boss comes in and is like, you're like nobody's able to buy anything, and you spend like that for.
Just one person, thank you.
Oh, thanks, man. Last slide, joymode.com/VuejSLA. If you go to Joymode, you like the service, and you can sign up and get a free month. So
awesome.
Check it out. Cool. Thanks, man.
I think we all agree that was excellent, so thank you. So first of all, again, that was really awesome. I continue to be just amazed at the quality of conversation in this group week after week, and it just keeps growing, and just like the level of engagement is amazing. So that's great. A few things. So we've got some time to have some pizza, etc. I want to share people who are looking for jobs, etc. can show. We'll do like a 10-minute break, and then we'll like regroup and do the rest of the questions, etc. Does that sound good? All right, let's do it. Do it.
Yeah.
Is there a question?
If anybody's looking for a job, I'm hiring for positions.
Okay, I was gonna do a round of everybody shout out which jobs they're looking for. So should I do that now or after? Start off. Sorry. Go ahead.
So I'm the research applications lead at decouple. We have 4 Vue.js positions open. Some juniors, some seniors, some not yet.
Excellent. You should talk to Rick, which I think you guys may have met or not.
We've met.
Okay.
But digitally.
Okay.
All right, so over at Vuejs, we're hiring two front-end positions, not necessarily Vue, but not necessarily not Vue. So come in, we're trying to lay out our front-end foundation right now. You can make an argument for using Vue. There we go.
I feel like people keep apologizing for being React people, etc. There's a lot of React people and a lot of PHP people in this room too. So show up all two ends of the coolness spectrum, but all useful.
Joymode, we're looking for a front-end engineer. So if you guys want to help us write some tests.
There's lots of tests to write, guys.
We're Funkhouse, a creative agency based downtown. We are looking for a front-end Vue engineer.
Excellent.
Bambi, also downtown, HR for small businesses, and we're also looking for a senior Vue engineer.
Is there a hand over there? No, I was looking at you. Apparently not. You doing this?
I was reading something in a job description, and they were saying 5 years Vue.js. What are you talking about?
All right. Well, since I'm doing all this stuff now, first of all, I would love to take a photo. We don't do it yet. Sit still. Just a few other kind of just general questions. I mean, so again, like the group just keeps growing. I'm trying to get a sense of like, which is fantastic. I think it's a lot of things all come together. A big part of just Vue in general. First of all, how much of just people coming here today was just location, the ability to get here? So, because there's people who have preference for Santa Monica and people who have preference for downtown, and this feels like the closest thing in the middle, but it's not always, it's hit and miss whether or not we get different locations. So, are people like strongly for downtown or Santa Monica?
Downtown.
Okay, so that's why this is the perfect place to go. Okay. Also, just for the last couple sessions, I've done one talk, and this was really great and deep. But prior to that, I did kind of like the main talk, like this one, and then like another little talk. Do people have a preference for kind of like having like if I had another 15-minute talk now, or is that too much for future ones? You just like having a little more time to chat with each other?
I'll float an idea. I like the one talk, and then like a Q&A thing would be great. Because like having a whole bunch of passionate Vue people, like it's great to be able to ask like a question on specific, like for me, it's like, hey, we're trying to figure out how to use the head tag in Nuxt better. Hey, does anyone know how to do that?
That's great.
I like that practical stuff better.
Okay.
That's me.
I'm gonna write that down.
That whiteboard session that we had a couple of
Yeah, that was actually okay. Because those kind of things I'm always like, are people tolerating it or do they like it? So that's actually good to know. Okay, so I'm gonna write those both down. What else did I have on my little list here? Oh yeah, just like upcoming potential talks. I'm trying to look at the people who suggested them, so it's not like not picking out people. One was a talk on GraphQL and Apollo. Is that interesting?
Yeah.
Okay. Also, I don't know if it's like a full talk, but like a talk just basically, so not the Vue hooks, but there's kind of like React came out with React hooks, which are different. Only now they have them in React. But I'm saying it that way so that it's not confused with the current hooks that we're all familiar with. So that is a concept. Is that something that you guys want to even learn about? Is that interesting? I mean,
but they're in Vue.
Well, so the concept of React. Well, I'm just going to point to John.
There was some talk about like what hooks will look like in Vue. It looks like in Vue 3, and it's actually possible now, but like I wouldn't recommend it because it's using undocumented APIs. But in Vue 3, there will be a pattern that they're calling compositional components, which is really cool and involves the new like advanced reactivity API. So I don't know if you've seen like you can create a new view observable, just like outside of a component. And then there's dynamic lifecycle, or there's lifecycle injection hooks. So like you can say before create, I'm going to add an on-mounted hook to whatever component this is being bestowed upon.
Okay.
So yes, the combination of those two will result in hook-like functionality that they're calling compositional components. But I could present on that.
So that's, yeah, I mean, I was planning on having you do it regardless, because I was more like just kind of like seeding it in here. This thing's coming, even though you guys might not be familiar with it, because it seems super interesting. And then another one just kind of like on just using Webpack within Vue, like the Vue config is really interesting, but I don't know how many people know how to really use it at all. And so just, there's a talk on that potentially coming up too. All right, I think that's good.
Request, we have a request.
Oh yeah.
Storybook UI.
Oh yeah, that was
Now
on.
it's with
Okay.
Vue, and I'd like to know way more about that.
Are you suggesting her to talk about it, or just
I know
somebody?
I want someone to tell me how to use it. John, I'm looking at you.
I sent that out as a request. I feel like somebody said they were using it.
Yeah, Joymode.
Oh, okay. So there we go. Done. Okay, another one for John. Okay, I'm gonna put that on the list. Story. Yes, Ham?
Yeah, microservice architecture on the front end.
Yeah.
No, I'm right now overloaded, but I'm for it if somebody comes here.
Okay. Excellent. Any other hands? All right. All right. I really would love to do a photo. I'm going to assume we're going to do this photo, and then everybody keep chatting. We're going to start trickling it out after there. So I'm just going to like do the thank yous now. First of all, Figs, you guys are awesome for hosting this. Thank you so much. And thank you also for Joymode for kind of like continuing to do talks. And I also just like both Funkhouse and Bambi, they keep like stepping up in general. So just like a general thank you for everybody who constantly is, really helping make this thing happen, because I can have the venues are great, but without you guys talking, this really makes it amazing. I mean, we're doing this is the first time we're recording this. I'm gonna hope to try to keep that going, and I can't imagine there are as many Vue meetups. There are that many Vue meetups at this size, period. And this is pretty cool. So I'm hoping the community gets to enjoy these talks with us.
Well, that's on you though. Thanks for coming.
All right, team. Does everybody feel up for taking a photo?
Yeah.
All right. Should we like kind of in that corner or something? You can have the Figs background logo in there. It's like you guys got like the double whammy on that.
They are pretty sexy stuff.
Yeah. Should we all put scrubs on for the photo?
Yeah.
Can we can you take the picture then?
Oh wow.
All right, everyone, like, I don't know how we're gonna do this. Who's gonna take the picture? I'll see. Who's got a phone? You're like, who's on here? You sure? All right, let's try to squeeze in. We're not like this is for a group developer. This smells pretty good. So what's that? Can you get us in?
It's going to be tough.
You want to step back?
You need to scoot in on the edge.
Everyone.
Oh, I got everyone. Perfect. All right. I'm going to take 3 of them. 1, 2, 3, say cheese.
Cheese.
All right. 1, 2, 3, say figs.
Figs.
All right. 1, 2, 3, say Vue.
Vue.
All right. Cool.
You want to wait? Can we get you to want to take one with him in there? Okay, sure. I'm going to force you anyway.
We'll Photoshop you.
That's right.
On the witness protection program.
Fine. Okay, yeah, I think I could get a 1, 2, 9.
Awesome meeting, guys. What's that?
I think we're still recording, so I think.
Yeah,
I think you got a setting up.
I think that you have.
All right, I'm gonna
Well,
stop.
stop.
Oh, awesome.